I've actually given this a fairly catchy title, which I don't normally do catchy titles, and then comes Monday. So, the past 5, well, I thought it was catchy. Catchy for me. Past 5 weeks, 5 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks? Yeah, we've been looking at the topic of Sabbath and what it means to us. And we've looked at ways. Thank you, Barry. I got a bit enthusiastic during worship. Actually, I was a bit worried because Pastor Rael put the microphone in my face and I had to sing and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to get up and no one will be here. But anyway, yes. So Sabbath. Chant. Oh, is that? Okay, I need to. Oh, is it? Yes. See, I think of chanting as Gregorian chanting. Anyway, all right. Need baritones. Yes. And my Bible app. Won't go there. Anyway, past 5 weeks we've been looking at the topic of Sabbath and what it actually means to us, what does the Bible say about it, and practical ways that we can implement it into our lives. And I'm sure that all of you have probably been challenged in one way or another. So today I want to ask, how do we take Sabbath into the week that follows? How do we stop it from becoming simply a nice thing that we do? Now we get on with the rest of our life. And so what are some of the benefits of Sabbath that we can take with us? And so some of the things that I noted were it helps to create a rhythm of pause in our lives, a slowing down, something that can be called a pattern interrupt, which is, I think, a psychologist's term for if you want to change behaviour, you identify the pattern and you interrupt it with something totally different. It helps us to recenter on God and on others, and to a degree even ourselves. And it reminds us of our human limitations. It provides opportunities to reflect on what we have done well and what actually maybe we haven't done so well. So with that in mind, I've got 3 points I want us to consider this morning. And the first point is that God is closer than what we think or realise at times. If I can have the first slide, Caleb. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 3. This is from the NIV Bible. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. Now, Moses has been tending sheep at this stage in the wilderness for 40 years. I wonder how many fires Moses has seen in that time. I'm pretty certain that he's actually seen quite a few. So in some respects, a burning bush is a familiar sight to him. It's something that he has seen on a regular basis. What's different about this bush? And he says, it did not burn up. So even though it's something he has seen before and possibly something he has seen quite often, he pauses long enough to notice, but there's actually something different about this particular bush. He's paid enough attention to it, and he changes his plans. I will go over. Some versions say he turns aside to it. So he is walking in this direction, he sees it, and rather than just go, oh yeah, that's interesting, I will go over. I will turn aside. I will change my plans. And as a result of it, he encounters God. His life is changed, and not just his life, but as we know the story, the life of Israelites as a result of that decision. If I can have the next slide, please, Caleb. Ruth Haley Barton writes, all of us have burning bushes in our lives, places that shimmer with grace, alerting us to the possibility that God is at work, doing something we could not have predicted. Now, I got to admit, when I first read that, I went, really? Do we all have burning bushes in our lives? And I realised that in reading that, I had made a mistake. I was looking for something that was big and grand. Oh, do I have that big grand moment where God, reveals himself to me? Forgetting that for Moses, this probably wasn't a big grand moment. As I said, it was something familiar. But God takes the familiar and he twists it a little bit. And I believe that each of us do have burning bush moments in our lives where God takes that which is familiar and he twists it a little bit to actually do something that is quite extraordinary and that can change our lives. As some of you know, as maybe most of you know, I run a little charity called Spark of Hope. And in Spark of Hope, I use horses to help people in the community with any range of things, communication, confidence, self-awareness, really it's whatever that person needs almost. And when I first started it, which was about eight and a half years ago, I really had a mindset that it was up to me to create something extraordinary in what the people did with these horses so that something extraordinary would occur in their lives. If I can have the next 2 slides, and I might get you to sort of toggle back between them. What I've realised, though, it's not all the extraordinary moments. It's all the ordinary moments that, when in the hands of God, become extraordinary. And when I look at these people, and this is just a snapshot of some of the people we've had come through the years, what I see is people receiving something that they needed at that time. Encouragement, strength to go on, safety, peace, permission to let go and relax, joy, a place to belong, wonder, pride at overcoming a fear, an invitation to be open, connection, freedom, understanding their place in the world, and in some cases even being reunited with their family. Let us not dismiss what God can do through the simple things he calls us to do. Don't let familiarity rob you of seeing God at work in and through you. Deliberately look for those times and places where God shimmers in your life. Let us pause long enough to notice the moment that we find ourselves in. I'm going to read something from a book that I have been reading called The Soul's Slow Ripening. If I can get to the right page, here we go. And in it, the author writes, the desert mothers and fathers. So those, back in early Christianity, we had what they called desert mothers and fathers, people who were disgruntled with the way Christianity was being watered down, or people weren't seeking God as much as they should. So they would go out into the desert for times of solitude, silence, whatever, to seek God more wholeheartedly. So anyway, the desert mothers and fathers fled out to the deserts of Egypt and Syria in search of a place that could support their exquisite desire for unending attention to each moment as it unfolded. They knew that the soul thrives in slowness and that the divine spark of life reveals itself when we simply pay attention. The Irish monks followed them in this path as well, cultivating what was called watchfulness. It refers to a kind of calm vigilance in daily life, staying attentive to and aware of the inner movements of the heart, watching one's thoughts and noticing the patterns that arise. This inner attention, conducted with compassion, is the grace of the desert and Celtic way. When we pay attention, we remember to bless, we remember the gifts given, and we cultivate a heart of gratitude. Yesterday morning, I let our dog out. Yeah, hang on. Yep, you can take that. Yesterday morning, I let our little dog Daisy outside 5:30 in the morning so she could go and do what dogs often need to do when they've been locked up all night. And as I stepped outside, I was facing the east, and the light was just starting to break with dawn. So I could see light in the east, but was also stars still above me. So it was quite a nice transition. And the birds were singing, but there was one particular bird whose song I had never heard before, and I can't possibly replicate it. But it was just the most glorious melody as it went up, and then it came down, and it went up, and it came down. When I speak about noticing the moments, they're the sorts of things that I'm saying that we need to pause and to acknowledge and to thank God for. I mean, what's the purpose of a bird's song if only to praise God? And so when I'm talking about pausing, it doesn't even have to be in nature. Who here loves a cup of coffee? Yeah. The first, or a cup of tea. You know, that first cup in the morning, particularly if it's a bit cold and you wrap your hands around that cup and you warm up. You know, to just stop and to say, God, thank you for this. Thank you for the sensation of my hands warming up. You know, there are so many ways if we just pause. And I'm not saying we're pausing for hours on end. It can be just for a few seconds. But just to notice it and to thank God for it. Right. Our limitations. So my second point is our limitations are a gift from God. Sabbath reminds us that we're not Christian superheroes who can do all things. We need to rest, to find that rhythm that is found within all of creation. Trees and plants are not productive every day of the year. They have periods of rest and restoration. If I can have the next picture, please. This is where I've got, everyone wanted to know why I came in with a big orange stick today. This is why. This is actually a picture. It's not a great picture, but it's taken outside the window at my desk. So my desk at home, I'm looking out across our garden. This tree here, a month ago, was just bare. It's just started to break out into flowers and leaves. You can't really see them, but these little things here are actually our roses that Barry has pruned back for us. So they're not much to look at now because they're having that period of rest. They're starting to grow new leaves. But you come back in a couple of months' time and they'll be covered in flowers. These yellow here, they're our daisies. We've got daisies all around daffodils all around the place. You know, they're there for a month and then they disappear. Everything has a rhythm. Here is a fence. Behind that fence is what we call the dam paddock. And the dam paddock I'm currently resting because the grass, the pasture in it, needs a break from being eaten. It needs that period of rest. But you come back in 2 months' time and it'll be knee-high. There's a rhythm to creation of rest, productivity, rest, productivity. And it's the same for us. We can't just go 7 days a week. We need those periods of rest. We need those periods where we can just restore and recuperate. We see, before I say that, I sometimes wonder if one of the most misused verses in the Bible is actually Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I have heard that verse used to justify incredible levels of busyness, people doing things that maybe they shouldn't be doing, people being overstressed, people living in, incredibly stressful work situations. But I can do things through Christ. I can do anything through him, who strengthens me. The idea of limitations is actually very theological. We don't like hearing, particularly as Pentecostal Christians, we don't like hearing that word limitations because we immediately think something is stopping me. And there are some limitations that we do need to break through. But I suggest there's also a lot that we need to embrace. And as I said, the idea of limitations is quite theological. If I can have the next slide, Caleb. We see limits in the Garden of Eden. Genesis 2:16-17. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat it, you will certainly die. You can do anything but eat from that tree. Limitations. Jesus had limits. He embraced the limitation of being human. Suddenly, God, the Creator, was now hungry and tired and had to sleep. He resisted the pleas from those in Capernaum to stay and build a large ministry. That's in the Gospel of Mark. I read that and I think, how many pastors and leaders would say no to such an opportunity? He did not heal every sick person he met. He selected only 12 disciples. He had hundreds who followed him, but he limited himself to 12 disciples. He only ministered in Judea, not in Asia or Africa or Europe as it was then. And yet, if we have the next slide, Caleb, John 17:4, I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. I often think he hangs on the cross. He says it is finished. And I read that and I go, but there's still so much to be done. His work is finished. It's now for to those who follow to continue on. John the Baptist had limits. If I can have the next slide. Keeping Caleb on his toes today. John 3:26-27, and then verse 30. They came to John and said to him, Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, he is baptizing and everyone is going to him. John's disciples are concerned. Your followers are leaving you and now going to this man called Jesus. What are we going to do? How can you jazz things up a bit and make your ministry more appealing so that people stay? And John says, a person can only receive what is given them from heaven. There's only so much that I have been given. And that is what I have to be faithful with. He must become greater, I must become less. So what are the gifts of limitations? Freedom. I don't have to do everything. I have permission to say no. I have permission to focus on those things that I can do well. And I have permission for self-care. That is reasonable. I know for me this week, I had one particular person, I won't go into the details, but they faced some real challenges this week, some mental health challenges. And I had to ask myself, what's my role in this? And it was this gift of limitations, understanding that there were some things I could do and some things that I didn't have to do that enabled me to step back and go, all right, I'll do the things, God, you're asking me to do. But it's not up to me to do everything. The third point I've got here is the benefits of pausing. Sabbath breaks our usual daily rhythm and gives us permission to pause, to stop and reflect. Now, sometimes when we hear the word pause or meditation or reflection, we suddenly think we've now got to go and sit in a corner somewhere and spend, an hour focusing on the goodness of God. Pausing doesn't have to be like that. I was reading something this week that says our life is a bit like a mosaic. If you think about all different tiles, different pieces, different things that you do, and pausing is actually the cracks between those tiles. So it can be a few seconds here, it might be a minute over there. It doesn't have to be such a set long time. There is something called mental meandering, where you take a break from the task, and if you're sitting near a window, just look out the window and just spend a couple of minutes just thinking about something totally different. So pausing can take different forms. Science has found some of the benefits of pausing are that it helps us to optimise learning. It gives us that mental break. There used to be a theory when it came to learning that the only time you learnt was when you were actually in that moment of study, and that once you took a break, that was a wasted time, so to speak. But what they've since found out is that when you learn something new and then take a break, your brain works on it subconsciously. And it's like it packages all that new stuff and it puts it in a neat little box and then it stores it away, and then it frees up your brain to actually learn something new. So it helps with learning. It provides space for our nervous system to regulate. Who's familiar with the terms sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system? Your nervous system has two states. Sympathetic is that fight or flight, that adrenaline rush, that, if something makes you, go boo in the night and you jump and your heart starts racing. Or if you're really excited about something and you just can't wait to get there and you're dancing on the spot type thing. That's a sympathetic state. The parasympathetic state is the rest and digest. That's when it's all calm. You're sitting there, your feet are up, you've got a nice book, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, and it's just all peaceful. We need both. Neither one or the other is right, and the other one is wrong. And throughout the day, what will happen is that we will move between those two states. In theory, that's what we should do. But a lot of the world today is running on constant sympathetic state, the adrenaline junkies. And there's very little downtime into the parasympathetic state. And that's not good for you. So we need both. And so by pausing and taking that breath, and actually you notice Rael did it during the announcements actually. She stopped, she paused, get myself centred, off I go again. That's what pausing helps us to do. So it's less stress. It increases our focus. It can enhance creativity and productivity. And they've found that, particularly with athletes, it actually has health benefits and that there seems to be less injuries. And they think it has to do with this increased focus, that when they get tired, their focus on form, when you throw the javelin, you've got to be at a certain angle and your hips have got to do a certain thing and you've got to do a certain rotation. When you get tired, some of that goes out the window and that's when they actually are more likely to be injured. So lots of benefits when it comes to pausing. Can I have the next slide, please? I think this might be the last slide, actually. One of the things I do when I work with our horses is I pause between different activities so that when I'm teaching them something new, once they've done it, and it doesn't matter how well they've done it, I then give them a break. And I do this so that they can process what they've been doing and it stops them from getting overwhelmed. It's kind to them. But I sometimes wonder whether we need to show the same kindness to ourselves. By constantly pushing ourselves and not pausing, we can so easily become overwhelmed. So by creating some sort of space or margin in our life, it gives us time to process and to come back down. Final thought. We live in a world that is anxious, angry, and chaotic. Symptoms of a world disconnected from God. But we too can experience those same symptoms. There are times when we will get anxious or angry or feel like life is just really chaotic and out of control. And it's for the same reasons. We've allowed ourselves to become disconnected from God. But we know God, we have experienced Him, and so we can also, and in increasing measures, be a presence of stability that this world needs. I talked before about that situation, about God, what was my role, what were the things that I did, and what were the things that I didn't have to do when working with this particular person. And I realised that my role for that person has been a person of stability. That every time they came and saw me, they were seeing the same person. That we were doing not so much necessarily the same activities, but it was in the same spirit. Rael mentioned during worship about being steady. And I thought, yes, this world needs steady, stable people. And that can be you and I when we remain connected with God. It's my belief that Sabbath is so much more than a weekly breather. It's a place where we can recharge ourselves, where we can reconnect with God and take the things that we've received and learnt and apply them in the next 6 days. The concept of Sabbath should colour the rest of our week. So what I want to do is I want to finish. Have we got background music, quiet music, instrumental music, elevator music? And I want to finish with something that's called a Sabbath blessing. I actually read this to my Connect group last week, so I just thought we'll just finish with this prayer. May this day bring Sabbath rest to your heart and your home. May God's image in you be restored and your imagination in God be restored. May the gravity of material things be lightened and the relativity of time slowed down. May you know grace to embrace your own finite smallness in the arms of God's infinite greatness. May God's word feed you and His Spirit lead you into the week and into the life to come. Amen. Church, we've got tea and coffee in the foyer. If you want to partake of that, as always, if there's anyone who wants prayer, or maybe you've been sitting here this morning and you've been going, I don't know God like you speak about Him, then please come forward. There'll be somebody here willing to pray with you. Have a great week, guys.